fall weed control can often determine the outcome for next year's crop. Joining us on this episode of FieldLink is Mark Wayland. He is the brand manager for the Helena Products Group. And Mark's going to talk to us about the importance of fall burndown in your crop.
Plus, Jody Lawrence joins us from Nashville. Stay tuned for this episode of FieldLink.
And welcome to FieldLink. I'm your host, Bill Smith. On this episode, we're going to dive into the world of fall burndown. Lots of things to consider as we're, focused right here in the fall time. And joining us today in the FieldLink studio is brand manager Mark Wayland. Mark, welcome to FieldLink.
Yeah, pleasure to be here. Thank you, Bill.
Hey, Mark, it's fall time. A lot of producers across the country, they've been pretty active, between harvesting, and a lot of them have already been, burning a lot of their weeds down for fall production. But, why is it fall burn down so important for, agronomic purposes?
Yeah, you're exactly right. You mentioned that folks have been busy with the fall burn downs, and that's absolutely correct. A lot of the fall burn downs start to happen really shortly after harvest, according to how much weeds were present there at the harvest time, and then shortly after. But I think sometimes the misnomer is we call it fall burn down, but really it has to do more with is there opportunity to spray if I have a weed problem at that time, and a lot of that has to do with the temperatures and being able to get good weed control. But in a lot of cases, folks will come in shortly after harvest and they'll notice they've got a lot of weeds. So shortly after, it probably pays to go ahead and take care of those before they become more of a problem the next spring. And in some cases, they may not have very many, and they may be able to wait until the springtime. But a lot of times, it has to do with what's in the field at the time of harvest. And as long as the temperatures are high enough, and I'm assuming we'll probably talk about some of that during this podcast, but it's not a bad time to try to get control of some of those weeds.
Yeah. So what are some good? You mentioned timing is everything, and a lot of our listeners across the country, if you're in the Delta, if you're in Louisiana, you've already harvested some time ago. You've possibly already done a lot of your burn down, or maybe you're continuing it on. But you mentioned temperature. Temperature is pretty important when considering a fall burn down program. What are some ideal conditions environmentally for burning down your weeds?
Yeah, well, we know from just controlling weeds in general that weeds need to be actively growing at the time that we're trying to control them, or they need to have the capacity, whether it's in the soil or whether it's from a post-emerge standpoint, to be able to intake that herbicide, be able to translocate it to where it needs to go in the plant to kill that plant. And so it's important to have the temperatures in the right range for that activity to occur. And just, you have to speak in generalities here. Sure. Because there's a lot of different herbicides, a lot of different families, a lot of different modes of action, and the way these herbicides work, and then what you have in the tank with them that plays an important role in that. But in general, you're going to want to have temperature somewhere in the area between 55 degrees Fahrenheit and probably no lower than 40 degrees Fahrenheit for the best opportunity. And a lot of times in the fall period, we get a lot of those temperatures. We talk about fall, but even into the winters, in winter in parts of the country, you've got temperatures that are mild enough, warm enough, sunny days that you can do some fall burn down and do a good job of it, and get ahead of your spring work that you got to do.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. Kind of if you have that window, you can get ahead of that curve a little bit and take advantage of some of that time maybe, and beat those weeds back a little bit more often. Yeah. So tell us a little bit more about some things to consider. What kind of weather conditions? We talked a little bit about that, but what other typical weeds are present during that time of year?
Yeah, weeds can be certainly problematic in the springtime, and whether we control them in the spring or the fall, the the direction is let's control the weeds so
Right.
we have an easy time with our planting. We don't utilize all of our moisture up and our nutrition that we have in the ground. So waiting until the spring a lot of times allows the weeds to get up and start bolting, and we may miss the opportunity for an optimum spray because of spring moisture that we typically get that time of the year. So spring in the fall gives us an option to get ahead of all that work. Certainly the weather conditions are going to play a big role in timely applications. Those rains, like I mentioned, in the spring, when you want to get out there and you get started and really feel like you're doing something, and here we go. We get a week of rainfall, and we're delayed probably past the optimum timing, and we miss a lot of those opportunities. So, fall applications may help us with that situation that all of us face, that all growers face. And when you have heavy infestations, such as you mentioned some of the weeds you might have in the fall that you want to get a hold of, or things like a lot of the winter annual and some of the perennial or biennial weeds, mare's tail, henbit, dandelion, chickweed, pennycress, and even Italian ryegrass, among many others, can if you have a high infestation and you don't spend some time and dollars in controlling those, can be problematic in the spring.
Right.
And we have the opportunity during the fall to really look and choose our herbicides maybe with more flexibility sometimes than we have in the springtime. We can look at selective and non-selective products during the fall, herbicides with different modes of action. Some of them may have some residual, some of them may not have residual. But the point is that you have a lot of flexibility during this time of the year to consider what you're going to spray there without having to consider the crops around you at that time.
Right.
So the flexibility is pretty high in the fall. And, in most cases, we have that good window of opportunity to spray really from the time we harvest up through the fall and into the winter months, as long as we have the correct temperatures, or good temperatures is what I mentioned earlier. Sure. And then obviously based on the weeds and the sizes and the weather conditions, all of those things have to go into consideration.
Yeah, there's a whole lot to consider when you consider a fall burn down. You mentioned getting ahead of the curve a little bit, buying you time. And I think there's also some agronomic pieces here that we often overlooked. If we've got active, weeds out there kind of aggressively growing, they're still robbing the soil what might be left from a nutritional standpoint. And that's just, robbing the soil for next year's crop as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And the goal going in is really, when you start looking at it, is really to start clean. We always talk about whether you're controlling in the spring or in the fall, we want to start clean when we plant. And that's a big issue. And you really want a seed bed that's free of weeds. You don't want hassles at planting time. And most all of this, you can have some of those issues when you're dealing with our minimum till and no-till fields.
Right.
One weed that comes to mind, mare's tail, can be a really big issue. Mm-hmm. Mare's tail is a plant that sometimes it doesn't know whether it wants to be a winter annual or whether it wants to be a spring, and it has such a long window germination period, and then it can really kind of be in a rosette stage, a small weed, and then as you get some warm temperatures in the spring, it'll just bolt up and cause a big issue. So, mare's tail is problematic, and we do a good job. It's a weed that you actually have a little bit easier time, believe it or not, controlling in the fall months versus the spring because of that. If you miss the ideal opportunity, if it rains and you miss it, it can bolt and grow so quickly. It can get out of hand before you're able to control it. So fall applications to control mare's tail is a really smart thing to do. And if you've got a history, if you know that you got a mare's tail issue, you've had some misses in the past, you probably have a high seed bed, a fall burn down applications to get control of that while it's still a small plant is probably a really, really good idea and something that you need to talk to your Helena folks about.
Well, definitely, and you touched on something earlier too. By taking advantage of this fall time, we don't have the pressure of oh, my neighbor's crop's over here. I don't have to worry so much possibly about some borders and that sort of thing. So also increasing the ability to spread out our chemistry diversity is an important area. We're not relying on that one hit come springtime necessarily.
Right, exactly. When you get to the spring and you got a lot of different crops going in the field, customers got a lot on their minds. Right. Growers are trying to plant this, plant that. Everything that they can do to make that a little bit easier in the spring is really important because they don't want to get bogged down in problem fields. When you get to the spring, the other thing that often happens is the weather interferes, and you can't get into the field when you need to, and you miss those optimum opportunities. So, no, that's absolutely huge. So, being able to use fall applications to get a start on the spring is really smart, and we see a lot more growers doing that today, maybe than they've done in the past. Some of that has to do with the amount of minimum till and no-till acres. Right. But at the same time, it's a good agronomic practice, and it allows them a little more freedom in the spring that they don't have to devote all their efforts to.
Well, especially if you're farming in some of those more drier areas where moisture, can be at a premium, taking care of your weeds in the fall time just protects that overall moisture too. That's often overlooked for some of those growers, specifically out in the Western Corn Belt.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mark, tell us a little bit about it's time to select a product. What are some things that growers should consider when selecting the right kind of product or combinations of products for a burn down application?
Yeah. Yeah, one of the most important things that has to happen is you have to get out there and you have to know what you're dealing with. So it's really important to start with the scouting of the fields, to know what kind of weeds you have, what the level of pressure is, and if you have broadleaf weeds or if you have grasses or if you have a combination of both. It's really important to do that. And start doing that right after harvest, because in a lot of cases you'll already have them. If not, with the free up of the canopy and more sunshine, being able to get to the ground, you'll probably shortly after that start to have some of your fall weeds germinate. So it's extremely important to scout those fields, starting with just right after harvest. The other thing is just your general knowledge of your field and the field history.
Right.
What have you dealt with in the past in that particular crop over the course of the last several years? What weeds have been problematic for you? Just in more recent months, did you have an immediate problem this past year? Did you miss weeds? Because a lot of times that gives them an opportunity to seed, and to that'll give you a good indication of what's coming for the next year. Mm-hmm. The other thing is just to understand all that and have a good consultation with your Helena professionals to design, based on your knowledge of those fields and what you have, design a burn down program that's going to be effective for you, and it's going to take care of those weeds early and allow you more freedom in the springtime.
Yeah, I think that's a really great point, connecting with your Helena representative to identify what weeds are present, because there's different solutions, right, Mark, in terms of how we may want to handle, for example, you mentioned mare's tail versus henbit. There may be some different products, tank mixes and so forth to consider.
Yeah, absolutely. So with your, say for instance, you have a lot of winter annual broadleaf weeds, and you can categorize them normally by what activity certain herbicides have on them. To give you an example, there's just a whole host of broadleaf weeds that are you can get better control maybe with a dicamba containing product,
Okay.
and others are you'll get more effective weed control with a 2,4-D or 2,4-D ester type product. So knowledge of those, and which our Helena professionals have that
Sure.
information, they know that, and they can make the best recommendation. In some cases, you may in the fall time, you obviously want to go with a 2,4-D type ester product, which we've sold a product called Barrage HF for many years, dating back I think to 1998. It's been an extremely important product in our portfolio, and a large product in our portfolio because of what it brings, particularly in burndowns and for fall burndowns. It makes a lot of sense. There's different types of 2,4-D, but generally speaking, when weather conditions are a little on the cool side, esters are always going to be your first choice outside of 2,4-D amines or even acid formulations. Esters work really good under those conditions, and that would be a choice. So there's a whole host of winter annual, winter biennial weeds that 2,4-D is going to do a great job on. But then there's other ones that may be weeds that may be a little more problematic, like thistles, some clovers, a few other weeds where dicamba might be important. So in some cases, you might consider a straight goods dicamba. But if you really want to hedge your bets and get control of the biggest or the most versatility, you would go with maybe a combination of a 2,4-D and a dicamba, something like a product we have in Latigo Bold, which again we've sold for a long time. It's our combination product that has both 2,4-D acid and dicamba acid.
Okay.
And in those cases, it's going to do a fantastic job controlling just about all of those types of winter annual weeds.
Great. So let's step back a little bit to Barrage HF. You mentioned been on the market for a while. We've got a great history with that product. And it's important to point out that not all 2,4-Ds are the same. And one of the things that makes Barrage HF different is the formulation technology, Solvex. What can you tell us a little bit about Solvex formulation technology, and how does it make Barrage HF perform a little bit better than other 2,4-Ds on the market?
Yeah, that's a great question, and certainly we've had that advantage for a long time. 2,4-D esters, there's several different types of 2,4-Ds. There's the 2,4-D acids, the 2,4-D amines, and then you have the 2,4-D esters. Esters respond very well to certain, we'll call it seed oils and or methylated seed oil type blends or mixes, more so than they do even to petroleum solvents. Most all of the 2,4-D esters that are on the market today, certainly that I'm aware of, are all based on petroleum solvent systems.
Okay.
And they're used to dissolve the active, and they come in the ester form, and they do what they're intended to do, but a big chunk of what's in the gallon really has no functionality as far as weed control. It's more of a carrier. So a lot of a big portion of the gallon that's in say a generic 2,4-D ester really doesn't have any functionality when it comes to weed control. Compare that to a product like Barrage HF, which it has no petroleum-based solvents, but it has blends of certain seed oil-based materials in it that are highly lipophilic, and they help the ester get into the plant quicker and more efficiently. And we've had that advantage since the very beginning. It was a different way and a novel way to to supply a 2,4-D ester to our customers that set it apart. And we've had so much success, and not from our marketing and not from our sales ability, but from the performance and the repeatability. It's customer driven.
Right.
Our customers, our growers love the product, and that's what's driven the success of that product.
And definitely having that Solvex formulation technology helps the performance of Barrage HF based on the uniqueness that you pointed out.
It absolutely does. It sets it apart. There's no other product like it on the market, and there hasn't been from the beginning. It's a true differentiated product, and a lot of people say, well, it's 2,4-D ester. How can you really make a difference there? Again, I would port back to the success that we've had, and it's based on our customers' repeat purchase of that product. So because they love it, and it works, and it does what they need it to do.
Right, that's great. Mark, you also touched on Latigo Bold as another potential solution for fall burn down. Tell us more about Latigo Bold, and it has Moveo formulation technology. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so it's a little different approach than we have with a 2,4-D ester product, but if you look at really a lot of the auxins that are available to us today, and let's take into consideration both 2,4-D and dicamba, they're technical, or the active part of the ingredient comes as an acid, and acids can be difficult to solubilize.
Okay.
And you're not going to have an acid formulation dissolved in petroleum type products that are going to be effective like Latigo Bold. So Moveo is essentially a non-petroleum based system that is able to dissolve those acid, and then it has a lot of other components into it that helps the herbicide to get into the plant more efficiently, more effectively. It helps with the mixability you're very seldom are you mixing just one product.
Right.
With water, most of the time we have 3, 4, 5, even 6 products mixed in there. So the technology allows for greater flexibility and then greater overall activity and performance due to the package that's in there.
Yeah, and I think, again, a little bit like Barrage, Latigo Bold is different. It's different than a lot of other dicamba-type products that are on the market, and it all comes back to the formulation technology.
The other thing that a lot of folks don't talk about, but what is the active form of these auxins? And what's the active form of 2,4-D, and what's the active form of dicamba? It's actually the acid. So if you're spraying an ester or you're spraying an amine product, once it gets into the plant has to turn it into an acid in order for it to be a successful herbicide. We're essentially bypassing that with delivering the herbicidal form to the plant, and that's what Moveo is all about.
Right. It skips that step essentially, and it goes right to its job of knocking down those weeds.
It absolutely does. Yeah.
Mark, what are some management practices that will, I guess, help growers ensure the best performance and outcome when using some of these products?
That's a great question, and success starts. It starts right there in the field with the owner operator. Who knows the fields better than they do?
Right.
And it comes from right after harvest is scouting those fields. So you get out there after harvest and you don't see much. Don't just rest on your laurels. Get out there 2 weeks later, see what you have germinating. So scouting the fields probably is the most important step that you can take. Knowing what you got and when you got it and what are the conditions around you. Knowing that field history is part of that. Knowing what problems or what successes that you've had over the last few years in controlling weeds in that field. It all goes into a successful recommendation for when you are going to spray. Do you have winter annual pressure, is it low or is it high? Do you already have weeds even before you harvested, and now they really show up after you harvested? You got a green tinge to the field.
Right.
It's important to know those things. Was the density already at harvest high, or was it extremely low? Do you have any history of resistant or tolerant biotypes out there? Do you have weeds that are tolerant to glyphosate? Or do you have weeds that are tolerant to any chemistry? Or maybe 2,4-D has started not working as well. That may be an indication that we may need to put some dicamba or even another chemistry in there. And what are the factors that might impact a timely spring application? If you have a low spot in the field, or you have a field that tends to hold water more, stays colder longer, in springtime, you're going to have a lot higher probability to have moisture and water. In that case, if it's dry and you got pretty warm temperatures during the fall or winter, that might be a time to start your weed control and not take a chance on not being able to spray it in the spring. So those are some of the things that I would say, but I think it all starts with scouting and knowing the history of your field is absolutely.
Wow. Mark, what's to come? What's on the horizon? What's in the pipeline? I guess for the future, as we take a look at some of these products and so forth.
Yeah. Well, I mentioned earlier that our Barrage HF, our 2,4-D value-added ester formulation, has been around for a while, and we've been looking at that for a number of years. And the one thing that we always pride ourselves in is we've always tried to improve, because if you're not improving, you're probably falling behind.
Right.
And I think over the course of the last several years, we've thought intensely about, is there anything that we could do to improve the overall product, Barrage HF, whether it's with handling, mixing, overall performance? And I think the answer is yes. There are some improvements that can be made, and I'm happy to say that we've got a new formulation that'll be coming out that will probably have some availability in late 2024 and then for 2025. And it's a product that we're going to call Barrage Evo. We're extremely excited about. So all it does is it takes Barrage HF to even a new level. And so that's exciting.
Right.
It's exciting for us, obviously, but it's also going to be really exciting for our customers to be able to take a product that has been so beneficial over time and even improve it more. So we can't wait to get that one out.
Well, and I think you pointed out well, Barrage HF has been a phenomenal product for us, still is a great, dependable market leader. And we're really, quite frankly, taking the best on the market, and we're going to be making it better as we introduce Barrage Evo next season. Mark, help us sum this whole thing up. How can we make things easy as possible as growers are wrapping up harvest and going to take a look at their fall burn down in many cases, and some have already started. But what are some quick tips here?
Yeah, I think just the remembering all the benefits and the things that controlling weeds early and potentially controlling them in the fall versus waiting on the spring, if those could be top of mind, then you're going to be in a great situation. And I think being able to consult with someone, consult with your Helena professionals that they live this, they do it all the time. They've seen what works and what doesn't work, and so there's an equal amount of information that can be shared there on both sides to make great recommendations. But I think getting hold of and controlling the weeds early. We've already talked about it, allows for better workload management in the spring. But the other things we haven't even touched on is, we want those soil temperatures to get warm as quickly as possible. If you've got a bunch of trash out there, whether it's green or not green, you're going to delay how fast your soil heats up in the spring.
Right.
That can make a huge amount of difference. If you leave weeds all winter long, and you wait to spring, then you're not only allowing them to use up what could end up being very, very valuable moisture, but also the nutrients. You got to remember those weeds are taking up nutrients as well. And then the other thing that I'll just mention, and we know it to be true. There's so many, you can just go on the internet and read it, but trash in the field, specifically weeds and winter annual weeds, they can harbor a lot of things that can end up being devastating for the next year, various insects and diseases. Man, if there's an opportunity, we can get control of that early on. We do away with those areas where those other pests can get in there and kind of take root and then have an impact on our operation.
Sure. Well, Mark, those are some great tips, as growers are in the thick of things of fall right now. As we're recording this podcast here in middle of October, certainly many growers are well into their fall burn down. Others are really just getting started, and taking some of these tips can really, get them set up great for next spring. Mark Wayland, brand manager for Helena Products Group. Thanks for joining us here on this episode of FieldLink.
Welcome to this week's edition of the FieldLink podcast. I'm Jody Lawrence, the Strategic Trading Advisors, and Bill Smith is on the road this week, but co-hosting with me is Brady Lawrence, Vice President of Strategic Trading Advisors. Welcome to the podcast, Brady.
Thanks for having me.
Well, we've got a lot going on. Last Thursday, we had the USDA report with the latest yield update. We have a new wrinkle in all the Middle East tensions with the Israel and Hamas problems that are going on, and it seems like a new war and a new front with the invasion of Hamas into Israel last week that's sending the energy markets and into a lot of turmoil and volatility. And as harvest moves along, we've got several different factors moving and what's determining price right now. Brady, what did we find out about harvest today?
Well, harvest is moving along a little ahead of expectations for soybeans, but right along for corn. Corn's seen harvested at 45%. Last year at this time, we were at 42%, so a little bit ahead of last year. And beans harvested at 62%, which is ahead of expectations, and 10% ahead of where we were last year.
And we have not, the farmers I've spoken to, and Brady, you can tell me what you're hearing, but the farmers have spoken to this point, since we're a little bit past halfway on beans and just about at halfway probably today on corn, is that the farmers in the Eastern Corn Belt were happy and a little above expectations for their yields, while everybody in the Western Corn Belt was good in spots and not good in spots. The inconsistency, I think, we're finding certainly in the areas that were hit with the drier spring and the drier late summer weather. So this lent itself to what the USDA updated us with last Thursday in their October update, with national corn yield coming in at 173 bushels per acre, when the trade estimate was 173.5. So we got a little bit bullish surprise out of that. And corn is back up. December corn's back up, testing the $5 futures level. And on beans, the bean yield estimate came in at 49.6 from the USDA, while the industry had an average guess of just under 50 at 49.9. So two bullish surprises, which, or mildly bullish, I'd call them, which was certainly helpful to everybody's attitude, because it seems like the last several USDA reports, they've ganged up with the bears to keep pushing prices lower, despite the fact that their condition reports are lending themselves that the yield should be lower than 173 and right at a 50 bushel yield. So those numbers are what the trade is trading right now. And two big psychological factors moving in as every farmer has got a lot of extra harvested bushels to sell if they've run out of space is that December corn has run up against $5, but not been able to punch through it. 4.99 and 3/4 was last week's high, while beans briefly flirted with $13 and saw a lot of hedge pressure at those two psychological levels. And we're seeing some interesting basis plays across the country that we're seeing much better corn fall delivery basis than we are for beans in a lot of different regions, which we really don't have a good explanation of yet, other than apparently what we're seeing. The obvious is that farmers are storing their corn and delivering their beans, which would make sense to why you have that discrepancy in yields. Brady, what are you seeing and hearing from the customers we're talking to?
Yeah, similar to you, Eastern Corn Belt, people we talk to, Illinois, Indiana, they're happy with what they've got. It seemed like they had the timely rains and avoided too much blistering heat during the important time in the growing season. So they're very happy over there. When the Western Corn Belt, some areas got some rain, a little bit of rain, just enough to help make a decent crop. And then some areas, there's nothing there. It's been hot and dry going back even past this year to where they couldn't really make up in places like Western Kansas, to where they're going to not be too happy, but they kind of saw the writing on the walls early on in the season to know what was going to happen. But yeah, just kind of a lot across the board, a lot of variations. But I agree, the 173 number from what we've heard definitely seems more reasonable than what some private estimates had, all the way down into the mid 160s and all the way up to the high 170s. 173 seems, I'll give the USDA credit, it seems more reasonable than that has in the past sometimes.
Well, Brady, you're too young to realize that you simply can't say that the USDA is reasonable. But I say that tongue in cheek because a lot of us been in the business for a long time. We always see some head scratching numbers, but I do agree with you that I think everybody breathed a real sigh of relief on Thursday when the yields were trimmed and cut even below expectations, because I think there's always that scar tissue that builds up on USDA reports, especially when you start talking about when they get into their plots and they're pulling all of their yield data, that you're always afraid of the bearish surprise. So, a good start and certainly a good place to help build some seasonal yields or some seasonal bottoms for as these markets try to crawl back higher. One of the things that you do get with that is obviously some people are getting a few more bushels, but if you get more bushels and the price goes down, the ratio has stayed very consistent. That the income per acre has not been hurt too bad by the falling prices, as the yield has been a little bit better than everybody expected. But one of the big things that we're watching now are the outside markets, and it's almost impossible anymore to separate what we consider basic fundamental agriculture information, weather, production, and export totals from what's going on in the rest of the world, and certainly the issues in Israel with Hamas and what could develop in the Middle East. We've seen crude oil rally, $5-6, and then it pulled back, and it's down a little bit more today. But we have crude oil back in the mid 80s at 85.66 current trade today, while diesel futures in December have moved back over $3. And crude oil in the last 6 to 8 weeks has rallied almost 33, 35% from the mid 60s to the mid 80s. So fuel is definitely a concern, and it will be something that until we can get some more clarity on what's going on with the Russian and Ukraine plans and kind of how that war drags out into the winter and what goes on, since Hamas is believed to be largely funded by the Iranian government. If Iran does get involved in this and additional sanctions do hit Iran on their production and their ability to export their oil production, we certainly wouldn't be surprised if oil had an upside of somewhere in the $92 to $98 a barrel range. So any pullbacks that you see from or lower prices from your supplier, certainly be looking at that as a good hedge opportunity to top off your tanks when we get to so you can start looking ahead to the end of fall, what you'll need for the winter, and also potentially even some early spring. And Brady, I see today that the dollar is down another 400, and we're off the highest levels. What do you think's going on with U.S. dollar when you look at the big picture of the U.S. economy and also the world?
Well, I would say it's due to recent events and uncertainty, but considering the dollar's basically been going up since early August, there's obviously other factors involved with what everyone seems to think is a pending U.S. recession sometime in the first half of 24, or the U.S. government potential shutdowns. There seems to be a lot of outside factors and noise that just keeps driving the dollar up while also hurting our own economy in ways that might play out down the road.
Yeah, the dollar has been a challenge because even though we're roughly about 1.5% above the highs from October, when you look at the dysfunction in Washington with the House of Representatives not having a speaker and unlikely to have one anytime soon, which stops both bodies basically from being able to do any work. And you have what's going on with the looming government shutdown again. I believe it was a November 15th, kick the can down the road deadline, and what's going on potentially in Israel with our ally over there. You've got a lot of outside factors that make finding or even anticipating fair value for the U.S. dollar, how it could ripple over into interest rates, what's going to happen with treasuries, and so many things on what the Federal Reserve has more factors to consider now on whether they continue to raise rates or they're going to take a pause and hopefully looking at the economic numbers, especially the employment numbers, might be heading for a soft landing. But an awful lot of things to talk about, unusually high level, especially this time of year when all we're usually talking about is harvest progress and what those yields are looking at. So, Brady, anything else that you are seeing out there that we need to make everybody aware of?
No, I would just say keep an eye on the Mississippi River. We were lucky to be in Memphis recently visiting some family, and they're saying that in Memphis it's at the lowest point it's been historically, and everyone can remember the fallout of what happened with that, the previous record low, which I believe was last year. So just that would be something to keep an eye on as well, moving down the road.
Okay. Well, I appreciate it, Brady. Thanks for standing in for Bill. And anybody that needs to get in touch with either one of us, please reach out either through the newsletter. My email is jblawrence@comcast.net. Brady, what is your contact information?
My email is blawrence@rcmam.com.
Okay. Well, Brady, thank you. And everybody out there in the combine, be safe and get harvest finished and have a great week.
Thanks for listening to this episode of FieldLink. Be sure to talk to your Helena professional about Barrage HF as well as Latigo Bold for your fall burn down needs.